There are certain things that you do in chess that stop your chess growth. If you are stuck under 1500, this video is perfect for you because I'm gonna tell you exactly the things you must stop doing, as well as what exactly you should do, of course, to get to 1500 rated mark and beyond. First, and the most important thing that you should stop doing is just playing chess without ever analyzing your games. This is the most crucial thing. Once I understood it, I immediately became a much stronger chess player, because if you don't analyze your games, you're consistently making the same mistakes over and over again. You just don't improve. So make it your rule before you're allowed to play your next game. Always analyze the game you just have played first. Now, of course, to get maximum result, you should do it the right way. Let me show you how I do it with an example of this absolutely insane game from the Grand Chess Open that I played. I was having white pieces here. I made a brilliant move. There were so many fascinating concepts that you absolutely must learn out of this game. So let's start. I played the move d4, which I definitely recommend. By the way, I'm using this chestnut board. This is the sponsor of today's video. More on that later on. So I continued with knight to f3, b6, and we have the king's Indian defense. So I immediately knew that there is a huge battle waiting for us. I'm playing this bishop g2 variation, castles, castles. My opponent plays d6, which basically now officially starts the king's Indian, because there was an opportunity to play d5 instead, and that would be the Grunfeld defense, symmetrical Grunfeld. But now we have the king's Indian, and I'm playing the move b3. This is known as a double fianchetto variation. I love it so much. I can sincerely recommend. You can score so many victories with it. I mean, this is the perfect opening. And by the way, I have an entire course, 10-day opening mastery, where I go into so much details in terms of this variation in the King's Indian, as well as help you build an entire opening repertoire. There is a huge sale available right now for you today, so just hit the link in the description if you are interested, and make sure you are not too late, because people are happy with it. You can get everything you need to know for many years to come in terms of openings and never worry about it at all. And there is also 100% money back guarantee, 7 days. If you're not happy, you can just get your money back. So free tutorials on the website, take a look at yourself. If you like it, maybe it's something for you to finally break through in chess. Anyway, my opponent plays c6, which is one of the, well, normal lines in this variation, and I was expecting something like queen a5, with queen to h5 ideas, quite a typical one. My opponent just played bishop f5, just bringing new pieces into the game. This is like a normal desire, right? We need to bring all of our pieces into the game. This is, by the way, the golden rule. Develop all of your pieces as fast as possible and as active as possible. Just religiously focus on the development in chess. This is going to help you so much. Before you are making a second move with every single one of your pieces, just make sure everybody is developed. So the golden rule is one piece, one move. And this is what my opponent is doing. This is what I'm doing. So far, so good. But the problem is, and the players below 1500 just so much ignore this key chess principle. The principle is the following: never make a move without thinking what your opponent can do. Chess is a battle of two men. I mean, you never play alone. You always need to focus on your opponent's ideas, threats, hopes, and dreams, what he wants to achieve. And you should always ask yourself, once your opponent is making the move, bishop f5, what he wants to achieve and what I can do about it. Well, by the way, my opponent wasn't a man, was a very strong woman from France, and she was playing bishop f5, I assume trying to get control in the center, because center is the most important part of the game. You always need to fight for it. So this is what I decided to do. So I believe she missed this opportunity for me, knight to h4. This is what I played. So before you make a move such as bishop f5, you should think whether your opponent can attack your piece. First of all, always when you make a move, just make sure the piece you are moving cannot be taken. This is gonna just stop 99% of your blunders in the first place. But then when you're a little bit more advanced, here comes the second rule. Try to think what your opponent can do about your move. If you're moving the bishop, maybe this bishop can be attacked. And this is what I'm doing, knight to h4, and it turns out it's not that simple to deal with the problem. because, well, I threatened just to take. That would be a horrible turn of events, because first of all, I get a pair of bishops, and so many low-rated players don't understand that. They say, well, the bishop is worth 3 pawns, the knight is worth 3 pawns, what's the difference? Let me exchange my bishop for a knight. No, that's wrong. Please remember it from now for your entire life. Bishop is stronger than the knight. Of course, there are exceptions. Like in every rule in chess, there are thousands of exceptions. That is why chess is so complicated. But still, in vast majority of the cases, the bishop is stronger, especially if there is a potential to open up the position, and especially if you are not getting anything out of it. Never exchange your bishop for a knight without a very, very good reason. So that's not a good option. Now, if the bishop wants to go away, there is no really good square from it, because every square has a disadvantage. If you go to g4, then I'm gonna just play h3 and kick you away once again. You cannot go to h5, because I'm gonna play g4 and win your bishop. If you go to bishop e4, which seems like a logical way to play because, well, you want to be in the center, you want to fight for the center. But of course, I'm gonna just play f3 and kick your bishop away. It goes to d5, I'm gonna continue with e4. You're wasting so much time. Remember the golden principle, one piece, one move. So this strategy doesn't work for black. I also broke that principle, by the way, because knight h4 is the second move with the same piece, but I did it for a very good reason, because I'm creating an annoying problem for my opponent. So if you go back with your bishop, then you also don't have a good square, because if you go to e6, you're blocking the e pawn, and the e5 is kind of the main idea of black in this variation. Then I can just easily play e4 and everything is good for me. If you are playing bishop to d7, then you're taking the square away from the knight, which is also not great. So there is basically no good square for the bishop to go. That is why my opponent played queen to d7, and that unfortunately makes that mistake of allowing a simple trade of the knight against the bishop. This is wrong. Please don't do it in your games, and I'm gonna show you how I used that to my advantage. Now, this is a very instructive moment here. Please feel free to pause the video for a second and find the best move. I guarantee it's gonna help you improve at chess. Okay, I hope you found it, because the right move, very, very important here. e4. Now, this is the most active move. This is grabbing the entire control of the center. So if you can play this move, you must play it. If you have the initiative, you must use it, as the first world chess champion Wilhelm Steinitz nicely put. So e4. Now the only question is whether black can take it, because if they do, we just lose a pawn, and, well, that would be a nightmare, and we are going to regret the day we were born. So we need to make sure before making our move that our pawn cannot be taken. Now, this is exactly what I did, and it turns out it's very bad to take it, because now I can play the move g4. I'm attacking the queen. Yes, from a strategical point of view, this is an ugly move, just opening up my king, but it's all about this knight, whether my opponent can save it. And turns out he can't, because after queen to f4, I'm just attacking the queen once again and playing bishop to f1. And basically, there is no way to save this knight anymore. And if you go to e6 instead, then it seems like the queen and the knight are on the same file, and I can use it easily. Continuing my development, by the way, always very important. Rook to e1, creating yet another threat. You can still defend it with one of the pawns, but I'm just attacking it one more time. I'm winning an entire piece. So that means the pawn is not possible to take, and then I just get the control of the center as well as a pair of bishops. So I thought, well, this game is going to be one-sided, I'm gonna just crush my opponent. And I was so far from the truth. I mean, she turned out to be such a resilient opponent. Actually, in the end of the day, that was absolutely insane. The position was equal and was so difficult for me to win. So let me show it to you. He played queen to a5. By the way, the queen is making a lot of moves, queen d7, f5, a5 now. This is also not great. This is what you should avoid. So far, so good for white, the perfect opening. Now I played the move knight to d2. I'm just continuing my development, and I want to go through in the center, because remember, center is the place all of the important actions are happening. I'm going to place knight b to d7, bringing more stuff into the game, and now I'm playing the move f4. I am going all in. I feel like I have the initiative, so I use it, and I feel like I'm more active in the center, and I also know that I have a pair of bishops, which means that I need to open up the position. This is how you use the power of the bishops, because if the position is closed, there is no use in having a pair of bishops. But if you manage to open up the diagonals, make your bishops active, then I don't envy your opponents. It's going to be so difficult for them to handle all of the threats. So f4, rook comes to d8. And just playing queen to e2 because I want to get rid of this diagonal. Remember to never put your queen on the same file with your opponent's rook. This is also a very, very good habit. My opponent plays e6 because, well, it's very difficult to go forward. I control pretty much all of the squares, so black has to be passive. This is a very, very bad thing in chess. Your habit, if you want to break the 1500 rated mark, is try to play as active as possible. All of the students I have ever had that were on the approximately the same level you're right now had the same problem in common. They were playing too passively, not going forward, not attacking, not creating the threat. This is the number one thing that always stopped their growth. Once we have worked a lot with it, they immediately started to improve their level. Because when you don't go forward, when you don't attack, you also make it much simpler for your opponent. And when he doesn't feel any pressure, of course, he's gonna make better moves. It's gonna be simpler for him to play. So never make this mistake. So far, I have played perfectly in this. But here I'm making the first mistake, which is not that obvious at all. I'm playing the move rook a to d1. And it turns out that the decision to play rook to d1 is the right one, it's just the wrong rook. I should have played rook f to d1, because in this case my a rook is still active there, and I'm still controlling the entire center and ready to crush my opponent. And it turns out it's very important that I don't control the queen side, and I unfortunately didn't understand that. Well, my opponent played b5, and it turns out this pawn on a2 might actually be hanging because, well, you couldn't have taken it before. Queen takes a2, there is knight c4, and so many threats, bishop c3, rook a1. I mean, this is very, very difficult for black to handle. But now with the time, this pawn might be hanging. So here I decided to play a4. And this is the move I'm happy to make, but it would be so great with rook on a1. Unfortunately, I don't have that rook. This is why it's becoming pretty difficult for me. My opponent plays queen to b6, and I once again have a problem with this pawn. I don't really want to take, because if I exchange on b5, then my opponent is going to play rook c8, my c2 pawn would be hanging. Somehow I don't like how it goes. So I'm playing rook a d to a1 back, and this is something you never want to make. You never want to shuffle your pieces back and forth. Of course, the golden principle, one piece, one move. I'm breaking all of that now because I felt I need to support that pawn. So of course it would have been much, much better to play rook f to d1 in the first place, saving me two full moves. So when you decide where to put which rook, try to understand where it's going to be more useful for yourself and where you should really play. My opponent plays a6. I'm going now king to h1. Before you go all into the attack, very important to remember to make sure your king is safe. So this is exactly what I'm doing, and my opponent is going c5. She is tired of being too passive to sit there and wait till I'm gonna come, so she goes for it. So, well, I also need to be active, because otherwise, what is the point of my entire initiative? I finally play e5, I attack that knight. He takes it here. Do we take with d pawn or f pawn? What do we do here? Of course, we take with the d pawn, because otherwise we are making it much simpler for black to somehow neutralize our activity. This way, this bishop on g7 is still completely stuck, so useless, so miserable. And look at that bishop on g2. My opponent doesn't have any light squares bishop, and this is how powerful that is. This is just an amazing one. Now the question is how to continue. All of the pieces are developed, but we need somehow to use it. We need to go on to use our initiative. First of all, I take on b5, because now this b5 pawn is hanging, so my opponent needs to pay attention to it, and I have this open a file at my disposal. Secondly, I go forward. I play knight e4, it's another move in the center, it's improving the knight's position. My opponent goes knight to b8, trying to somehow remaneuver the pieces, maybe bring the knight all the way to d4. And of course I was scared of it. When I imagined the knight on d4, I was like, oh my god, this is going to be a crazy piece, so have to do something about it. I started to create threats for my opponent. I played the move queen to f2, and now I'm attacking that pawn on c5. My opponent plays rook to c8 to protect it, but the knight is coming with the tempo now, knight to d6. And now something absolutely crazy happens. Last time I played rook a to d1, and this was the wrong thing to do. The right move was rook f to d1. My move was a mistake, and I paid a huge price, you could have seen it. This time I played rook f to d1, saying that, well, this rook is still on a file, I need it there, and I'm attacking the knight on d5 and creating a threat for my opponent. But it turns out this is completely wrong, and the right move should have been rook a to d1 instead. This is so crazy. This is why chess is so complicated. Because it turns out I don't get anything from that a file, and I really needed my rook over there. My opponent played rook to d7, and now you see the tactical justification as well, because I took here on d5. Now, if black just takes the bishop back, then of course I'm happy, I'm taking it, I'm winning a pawn, everything is perfect. But the problem is my opponent takes here on d6, thanks to the spin. Now there is this problem with the rook on a1. If I would have moved another rook, it wouldn't be hanging. And now if I take on d6, after bishop to b2, the rook on a1 is just hanging, as well as the bishop on d5, so it's not a good variation for me at all. So after rook takes, I played bishop to f3 back, and we exchanged the rooks, and I still hope that my position is better because I control the d file. Rook d8 is not really possible. I take it and take on c5, and I still have a pair of bishops, so yeah, I control the position. But it turns out rook c8, my opponent is just going forward, and the plan is simple, just to protect everything and then play rook d8 and fight for the file. I played rook to d6 immediately, trying to use the momentum. Window goes to c7, and now I realized if I allow my opponent to play c4, well, she's gonna get a lot of initiative. So I'm gonna play c4 myself. And here is the key moment. My opponent played here the move bishop to f8, just attacking the rook. Now, if I just go back, then the c5 pawn is protected, and my opponent plays rook to d8. And here it comes, the brilliant move, the first one I made in this tournament. I played the move queen to d2. Now, the move is insane because for objectively the engine says, well, it's equal whether you play queen to d2 or just go back. But if you go back from a human perspective, it's so simpler for black to continue. They just play rook d8, exchange the rooks, and well, very difficult with white to get anything because we don't control the d file anymore. But here, the engine says, well, I can just take on d6 and then defend everything. But from a human perspective, when you see this incredible diagonal, I mean, this is so horrible for black having those holes. The queen is coming to c3. Good luck trying to deal with those two bishops. And here you see how powerful that is, especially since black pieces are so passive. So my opponent didn't want to find herself in such a situation. Instead, she played the move b4. Now it's time for me to go away because, well, I don't have the opportunity to get to the diagonal anymore. c3 is covered, but I still control the d file. That was the most important thing for me. I get a little bit of time because my opponent plays bishop e7 with once again the idea to play rook to d8. And now the question is, how do you win such a position? Because you don't want to make a draw, of course. And this is what differentiates stronger chess player from an average one. An average one would just say, well, I can't really do much, I'm gonna go back and forth, and probably the game would be ended in a draw. But a strong chess player, and I experienced that so often during this tournament because I played against so many strong opponents later on, they are just taking every opportunity out of the position, create every single threat that is possible to create, to put so much pressure that you cannot handle it, and that is how they win their games. Now I'm gonna show you how I did it from this position so that you can use the same principles in your own games. But first of all, I want to say thank you to the sponsor of this video, Chestnut, for providing me this board for the purposes of the analysis, for playing the games. I truly enjoy it because I can use it for so many interesting use cases. I really enjoy analyzing the game on a real board because it helps back to the question of analyzing your games. Yes, analyzing on the computer is good, but when you really do it with a real board, it is even more helpful. You can shuffle the pieces back and forth, and the great thing about Chestnut Evo, it saves all of the analysis in your PGN file, so you can take a look with the engine immediately or afterwards. By the way, I always recommend you analyze the games first without the engine, to somehow try to understand your thoughts with your human ideas, why you did those mistakes and where you think you made mistakes, and only afterwards check it with the engine. This is the most powerful way to do it. So thank you, Chestnut. You have amazing products. And by the way, they have a big sale right now. So if you're interested in one of those beautiful products, This is the most modern one, but they also have different models. Feel free to take a look in the description. There is a special discount using the Journey to Grandmaster promo code or just the special link. So I played here the move g4. I want to somehow make use of my initiative and create problems for my opponent's king. And my opponent wants to just exchange the pieces. That's logical. The more pieces you exchange, the simpler it gets for you to achieve the desired draw. Now, there is no way for me to stop the rooks exchange, but I really wanted to prevent the queens exchange. Turns out I don't need to actually do it, because after takes, my opponent plays queen to d8, and the engine says I should just exchange the queens and play bishop e3, and this position is much better for white. And for me, it wasn't clear whether I'm going to be able to win. I thought rather not, but it turns out I can play bishop f4, f5 immediately, and somehow create some weaknesses. Not that easy at all. I thought instead I'm gonna play queen to e4. I'm still ready to play f5, and from a practical point of view, I thought this is much simpler for me to somehow create difficulties for my opponent. She played knight to a6, which is, yeah, rather more difficult to understand because the knight is not doing here anything, but she anticipated me playing f5 later on, and then after the pawns are getting trade, he plays knight c7, knight e6, and then on e6, the knight is a very important defender. This is actually what happened. Bishop e3, knight to c7. Now I'm playing the move f5. All of the pawns are getting trade here. Takes, takes. And well, I was happy about it because we were both in time trouble, and I thought, well, now I get to create some threats. This is a completely different story. I played here bishop to d5. And the engine also confirms, of course, when you see such a position, it's very, very difficult to handle all of the pressure. So this is what you do if you want to become stronger at chess. You need to make your opponent's life as miserable as possible. This is your purpose for every single chess game. Try to create as many threats as you can find, and just don't play the hope chess, please. Because the hope chess is when you are making a move that is completely not useful for you, with the whole purpose of creating one move or two moves threat for your opponent, hoping that he's gonna blunder it. Don't assume that. Always assume that your opponent is a smart guy or a girl, and he is gonna find it. So bishop to d5, for example, is a very useful move because I'm blocking the d file. I'm improving my bishop's position, and I'm making it much more difficult for my opponent to handle all of these threats. This is a multi-purpose move. Defending and attacking. This is what you should be aiming for. So now it's white to move. I need to continue my initiative. I played the move bishop h3, creating some immediate threats because basically I'm threatening checkmate, queen g4 check, take on e6, queen g7 checkmate. My opponent thought for a long time and found the best practical resource here to play queen to a7 and just create counterplay. This is back to the main mistake that players under 1500 are making. Don't be too passive in your game. You never want to wait for your opponent to just come and crush you. You want to create your own counterplay. And this is what black is having here. Yes, the king on g8 is incredibly weak, but I also have my king that is completely naked. Why can't you just attack it? And here is the moment. The position is completely winning for white, but please pause the video for a second and try to find the right move, because I failed. I made here a huge mistake. There is one move that is winning. There is another one which is just equalizing the position. No advantage. It's gone. It's just a draw by perpetual check. And I have made the wrong decision. So please feel free to calculate and find the right one. I played here queen to g4. And I based that on a deep calculation. I'm gonna just show you that in a minute. But the right move was instead to play bishop takes e6 immediately. And I, of course, also wanted to take the knight, but I did it after the check. And this difference is so huge. Let me show it to you. So now I'm taking that knight, but instead of taking it back and blundering the checkmate in one, of course, my opponent is starting to give me a lot of checks. Queen comes to a1. I play here king to g2. Queen goes to b2. I play king to f3. Now there is a choice. Queen takes b3 or queen to c3. Like, what would you do? Turns out one move is achieving the draw, another one loses. But the reason why it loses is completely different from what I have calculated. So my variation was that if my opponent takes the pawn, then I have the move king to e4. And I was absolutely sure that should be winning, because queen to c2, I just go to d5 and I escape with my king. There is no queen to g2 check Why? Because I made that check queen to g4. That was the entire justification of my check. I wanted to cover that square. But it turns out I was completely wrong here, because what I missed is that not only my opponent can play queen to c2 check, she can play queen to b1 check. And by the way, she found that in the after game analysis. And now if I play king to d5, then she plays queen to h1 and actually wins the game, because the only way to cover the check is to play queen to e4, but then she takes on e6 with a check and I lose my queen. That would be such a disaster. I guess I would just stop playing chess if that would happen in a real game. My opponent, instead of taking on b3, she played queen to c3 check, and she was very disappointed with this move because she thought this is the mistake, but it's actually the other way around. Queen takes b3 loses, this one makes the draw. Well, I played bishop to e3, and the problem is my opponent takes, I take it back, and now after bishop to g5, I don't have any way to win the game. Because, yes, I thought I can give a check and take the c5 pawn, protecting the bishop, but she just takes on b3, then she exchanges absolutely everything, and pawn endgame is a draw. The king is close enough to catch the pawn, and because of this b pawn, yeah, it's just a draw. And my opponent didn't play bishop to g5. I guess she was so tired, just as I was, because it was almost 12 at night. It was the first round. We started at around 7 o'clock, and or even later. And then it was so crazy. Also, it was the first day of the tournament, so we needed to get to the Karlsruhe, the playing city, and we both, it felt like, had absolutely no energy by the time we reached to the end game. So this explains the number of mistakes. And so my opponent, instead of playing bishop g5, which would help, she plays bishop to f8. And this is the final mistake, because now I have the move queen to f7. There is no way to defend the bishop. Played bishop h6, but now I'm just winning it without any problems. Queen f6, king to g8, and I even made this very good move queen to e6 first before taking the bishop, because now after king to h8, I take it, and there is an additional problem for my opponent, that queen to f8 is a checkmate. My opponent resigns, and I could have celebrated the first victory of the tournament, very important one. And this was such a crazy tournament. In this video, I am making a first video with my impressions overall of the entire tournament. My biggest problem in chess so far, and I mean, this is so crazy. Definitely take a look.